Welcome to Four Calling Birds podcast. Honest conversations that give us all a voice.
Four calling birds.
May I present Natalie Spence, singer and actress.
And I couldn't keep a straight face when I found out his first name was William.
Meredith Hepner Chapman, PR guru.
I remember there was a teacher at my friend's school, Mr. Crapper, and he would not have survived at my school.
Stephen Carter-Bailey, Great British Bake Off Queen.
I had a weekly ailment.
And myself, Hayley Clapham, voiceover artist. And I am your host for this very first episode. We have 2 interviews this week, and we're talking about education during this pandemic. Firstly, I've chatted to Andy Percival, who was a head teacher in Leeds, and then Amelia Theodorou, who was a politics student in Liverpool University. Both really insightful conversations from 2 different perspectives. So there we have it. Episode 1 of Four Calling Birds, talking about education. So here I am with Andy Percival. Now, Andy, teaching during a pandemic, I bet that's a phrase you never thought you would hear.
No.
And we are living through exceptional times. Schools have had to adjust hugely to an unprecedented sudden change in teaching. So let's go back to the beginning, a year ago. As a school leader, how did you manage that sudden change? Did you feel unprepared and overwhelmed by the situation when we first entered school closures and remote learning?
Completely. It's like nothing I've ever done in 22 years of being in education. Everything we've done over the last 12 months, we've had to learn from scratch and adopt new ways of engaging with our stakeholders, looking after our stakeholders, but also learning new technologies to support learning as best we can throughout this time. And that word unprecedented has been used time and time again, but it really has been unprecedented. How did we manage it? We managed it by recognising that we were going to make mistakes at times.
Yeah.
The priority as lockdown was coming was to make sure we had robust, well-established lines of communication with all of our parent carers and with our students. Because that was going to be the basis that we would rely on that for as long as it took. And we had no idea how long it was going to be for at that time.
Yeah.
We weren't set up with the technologies, the learning platforms, the software to support remote learning as we're seeing it now 12 months on. I think one of the first things that I did was a poll of all of our students and families to find out what IT access they had, covering laptops, tablets, smartphone, also looking at whether they had internet at home and whether or not they had sole usage of a device, and whether or not they had a quiet space where they could work, which we soon found out that many of our students were sharing one device between 3 siblings and often sharing a room. So the different environments that our students had to work in ranged poles apart between them in terms of what some students had and others didn't.
I can imagine. Quite a challenging undertaking for you to do that. A lot of times we take it for granted. Not everyone has a laptop or a tablet that they can just solely use. Not everybody has internet access.
Absolutely. So as I said, one of the things we did was really look at that communication. So we made sure all of the students were set up with their email. We have a communication platform called EduLink, which the parent carers, staff and students all have logons and access to. As lockdown was coming, I ran a series of assemblies with every year group and made sure that they got their mobile phones out, they downloaded the app and logged into it there and then, so that as we were then saying goodbye to them, we knew that they were set up with that app on their phones so that they got push notifications, text messages if that's what I needed to send, so that we were secure. And what we said to the students as they went is that they needed to keep checking it, because we would be launching different ways of supporting remote learning. We made sure that every student had a paper-based work pack to take home. So in the case that they didn't have internet or IT access, they had some work that they could do. And we set up a way that they could access our school network with access to digital resources, and put a whole range of different resources in there for students to access, and then started looking at what technologies were out there. We've worked very closely with a company called Ed Lounge for many years, and the guys there worked with us to create an online version of our curriculum, and then we made sure that students could all access that and had username and passwords. So we copied our curriculum as they would be following in school on Ed Lounge, and a whole series of pre-recorded lessons that students could then log on very simply, regardless of device, and access some form of learning, albeit not live learning. There was a wealth of lessons on there that students could access. And the uptake was phenomenal. I think within the first week, out of a school of 1,700, we probably had 1,200 students accessing it.
Wow, that's great.
It is, but it's then the worry is then what's happening with the other 500, and then having to whittle that down and support. And we had a whole staffing structure with our pastoral teams and leadership teams who then basically got on the telephones and worked with families to get the numbers up of students who were accessing some form of e-learning from home.
And how are the needs of disadvantaged children being addressed by schools? Is it very much down to individual schools, local authority?
So, sadly, the disadvantaged become more disadvantaged in a situation where there's home learning. We redeployed all IT resources that we had, reconfigured laptops and provided laptops for families where we could. We purchased a number of laptops across our multi-academy trust. The DFE have provided some laptops, but the timescale in terms of delivery has been inexcusable, in my opinion, and the devices that were provided were not fit for purpose in many cases.
Right.
So what we tried to do from the outset was maintain engagement in learning, and where there is a delay in terms of students not being able to access devices and learning, then they become more disengaged and the disadvantaged become more disadvantaged.
Yeah.
Obviously, as a school, we could be open to children of key workers and our SEN EHCP students, looked after students and any identified vulnerable cohorts. And we did our best to try and encourage students to come in who were not accessing. But there was a fine balance with that in terms of also keeping our staff safe and working with our staff in what was a very unknown time. And people were scared. Parent carers were scared of sending their students in. They wanted to keep them at home and keep them safe during lockdown 1. But then there was limited access to learning. So we had a team of staff who delivered paper-based resources. As I said, we redeployed IT resources. We provided internet for a number of families early on through dongles that we provided. And it was getting our pastoral teams to work very closely with them. We worked with the local cluster multi-agency team who supported families, particularly when they worked across different key stages. So rather than having several different visits to a home, it was coordinating that there would be one person visiting to support, and getting that communication working with different agencies worked very well from the outset. But sadly, some of those most disadvantaged families really suffered and are still suffering through this time.
Do you feel that these families and actually the schools have had enough government support?
No, far from it. Since lockdown 1 to now, I've changed schools and taken over headship of an alternative provision in Leeds. So the guidance is I should be fully open, and because we're registered as an independent school, I get no funding. We've had no laptops provided. I can't access any equipment. We've had to get that from our host mainstream schools where students are dual registered, but there's a massive delay in provision of laptops coming through from DfE. We are finally over the this last lockdown starting to provide free internet for some of those families, but we're 8, 9, 10 months on from when this pandemic started, and the disengagement with some of those families is significant. What we have found is when they have then been given the devices and the access and the internet, they are willing to log on. When I took over in October, there wasn't any IT remote learning set up. Out of my year 11s, I've got 25 year 11s, we've had about 18 completing online learning with Teams. We've had students logging on from home with Ed Lounge. We've had students logging into live lessons with Teams. And taking their academic pathway very seriously. So we've had a lot of wins, which has been quite heartwarming to see.
Yeah.
But these kids have been let down, I feel, from the outset.
What do you think they need?
I firmly believe in a level playing field for all, for young people, regardless of the backgrounds that some of them come from. They still should have the same access and opportunity as others do. And we were very lucky. We have both of us work. We have a good job. We've got 2 kids, and when we realised lockdown was coming and we didn't have enough devices, we bought my youngest a laptop. But we were in a position to do that. Some of the families I serve don't have that access, and some of the money that comes into the families is spent on food and clothes and bills, and a laptop is a luxury. So I think that could have been coordinated far better from the outset, and recognition. We have pools and pools of data on all of our families across the country, so we knew who these families were. We could see what was happening across the world in terms of the pandemic and lockdowns and the impact, and we soon realised that this wasn't going away very quickly. And I think we could have coordinated better provision for disadvantaged families early on.
Do you think these school closures are going to have detrimental effects on learning long term?
Massively. And I think coming out of lockdown, it's about getting the balance of priorities right. I think, first of all, we've got a generation here who have not socialised in the way they normally would have done for what's nearly 12 months. And that's going to be a significant shift for young people in terms of readapting to normal life, whatever that may look like. I think prior to lockdown 1, every parent in the country was frustrated about the amount of screen time their kids were having. And then we've positively encouraged it for the last 12 months. And now we need to try and break that and actually reteach those social skills and allow kids to have some fun and normality, but while still balancing the pressures of education and results, particularly for those examination classes. Because in 5 years' time, are we going to look back at the COVID year and you were part of that exam cohort who missed a year of teaching, or will it get swallowed up in normal life? So I think there is a lot of work to do. The exam consultation is running now for this summer exams, but it's also about next year as well. Although I think the country has got to grips very well with remote learning, particularly over the last 2 lockdowns, I think there is a reason you have teachers in a classroom and there's a reason kids go to school. And that's kids respond best to feedback. And if they're not getting that instant feedback, then are they making the progress that they can? And I think there is a lot of work to do about balancing the content that still needs to be covered to still ensure we get exam results that support progression to whichever route young people take, but also still making sure that we're taking care of the social development as well.
Absolutely. School is so much more than just learning facts and figures and times tables and passing exams.
Yeah, and it's the walk to school, it's the walk home, it's deciding not to come straight home because you're going to play football with your mates, and after school clubs and relationships with staff. Everybody who's listening to this will all remember your favourite teacher, the teacher who's made the biggest impact on you as a child. And that's about the relationships that are developed. It's the friendships we make for life as well, and there needs to be time to allow young people to be young people and have fun. And
it's a safe place for children to be themselves and have fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think...
And some children don't have that at the moment.
No, they don't. And it's allowing socialisation in larger groups as well, rather than just meeting one other person. I think young people, adults will have a culture shock when we suddenly go back to socialising in larger groups, because it's not what we've become used to. But I think back to your point about some people not having that safe place, I think that's back to some of our disadvantage becoming more disadvantaged, and actually some people becoming more withdrawn from society, sadly.
What about your staff? How have they been? Have they been affected?
I think, like all of us, they're torn. They're torn between their own safety and their own families, and actually wanting to do the very best for the kids in our care. You go into teaching because you want to make a difference, and to suddenly see those young people based at home away from you and not being able to build those relationships quite as easily is difficult. But I've been overwhelmed by what I've seen from our staff. They have really embraced this as a new way of working. Form tutors have set up ways of creating videos with the whole class, chucking a ball between different videos and then editing it together as a means of seeing each other, live quizzes, sending messages over video, all sorts of ways of getting messages out to the young people just to say, we're still here and thinking of you. But it's been difficult. We've worked very closely with our unions, who I have to say have been very, very supportive, and that communicates across the whole body of staff. We have run staff meetings voluntary at the back end of school holidays so that people can be reassured about what we've put in place. So, for example, at the back end of August, myself and the head, when I was still at my previous school, just ran a voluntary staff meeting with 3 different time slots so that we could do a walk around of the site and show people what we'd put in place and that everything was there, so that actually they could spend the last week of their holidays feeling reassured that we'd done all we can. So it's been very much about working together with staff and allowing them a chance to have their voice, because everybody's different, aren't they? Some people are very, very scared about COVID, and the other end of the spectrum is some people have a more blasé attitude. But it's making people understand that their behaviours impact on others and making sure that everybody feels as secure as they can within their setting. So I think it's gone well with staff. They've certainly embraced new technologies, new ways of working, and very much put the kids first. I don't think we could have asked for anything more from our staff throughout this. And
do you think teachers should be vaccinated, made a priority?
Absolutely. I rang the Director of Children's Services myself on Friday with the nature of my kids as to where I'm working now. I asked if we could be considered, because I'm aware of some of the SEND schools have been offered the vaccine. I was told that it wasn't possible at this stage, because if they were to allow one provision, then they would have to allow it for all. But absolutely, I do think teachers should be vaccinated. I think that should have happened before we come back, but I don't think that's going to happen now.
So how do you see the future of teaching? Do you think remote learning is forever part of it in some form or another?
I think there's massive positives we'll take from this, and I think we have to. I think what is set up now with how we're working using Microsoft Teams and new technologies, we can't lose sight of. I suppose we've always struggled with the homework strategy for many years, and we found it through this pandemic because of how we're establishing assignments, feedback, and using Teams has worked really well for us. So it would be sad to see that side of life disappear when it's worked so successfully for many. But it can't be the only solution. The face-to-face human contact is building those relationships, the non-verbal communication that you lose over a Zoom call, a Teams call. That is irreplaceable, and I think that the sooner we get back to that, the better. But the use of technologies and ways of working can't be lost in this, and for very many students, they've learned some independent skills, self-managing, some strong IT skills, which will equip them for life.
Well, thank you, Andy. I've really enjoyed our chat today. I hope your return to school goes well. And let's hope we get those kids back in the classroom safely very soon.
Fingers crossed. Lovely to talk to you.
Next up, we have Amelia, who is a politics student in Liverpool University. Universities pretty much everywhere have been forced to move their teaching online, and you started your university degree in September 2020.
Yes, I did, yes.
So what expectations did you have when you started your degree? Were you prepped beforehand about how different things were going to be? Because you were entering a remote climate in terms of your education.
Yeah, we were. I mean, I always knew that it was going to be different. You know, we were told that things were going to be different. It would be online for most of it. But they told us in mid-October that probably by the end of November, we should be in at least once a week.
Okay.
I still haven't been into uni at all. Like, I don't know what my uni looks like. And I've been there for nearly 6 months. My flatmate does architecture, and he has been in a couple of times, but since the lockdown just before Christmas, he hasn't been in since, so he hasn't been in this year either, even though he does a practical subject.
Right.
When I first started, we have this system online, and we were given a very brief email of how to use it, but we had this new software that we'd never used before, and I remember the countless emails I would send to whoever I could find, because it's so hard to find the people to contact, who you should contact for what. So I sent countless emails to countless different people saying, I really don't know how to use the software, I'm missing my lectures, I have no idea how to do it. And I know that I was in the same boat as every other student around me. And, you know, it's fair enough. This is something that universities have never been through before. And the only university that has any experience in this area is obviously the Open University, which is an online uni. We felt that we weren't getting value for money at all. We're paying £9,000 a year for a course that is effectively the same as the Open University, but if anything, it's worse. And the Open University charges £3,000 for their degrees.
Right.
So there was a petition started at my uni, and I know that Manchester started one, Bristol started one, Exeter started one, and I'm sure many other universities did it as well. Basically a petition saying reduce the fees to £3,000 for this year. Yeah. And it got, well, the one from just my uni got 500,000 signatures.
Wow.
And the government straight up said, no, you are getting value for money. There's nothing else we can do about this. We're not reducing your fees. The university funding is needed. And the argument that we have is, well, why do the universities need this much funding this year? Because we're not going in and using their resources. We're sat at home or in accommodation using our laptops and our Wi-Fi. So
in terms of tech support for the students, it's very limited by the sounds of it.
Oh, completely, yeah.
And you are expected to go there and have a laptop. Do they supply that for you, or is that expected?
No. So you're meant to have your own laptop. You're expected to have your own laptop or desktop PC. I know that, to be fair to them, they have been quite good, because one of my very close friends at uni, he's dyslexic. And I know that for people with special learning needs, they supplied him with his own laptop. But by all accounts, it was a really long process for him to get it. And they didn't exactly make it easy for him.
That sounds incredibly stressful, because it's your first year at university. You're adjusting to higher education, your first time living away from home. and you're having to negotiate studying in a pandemic, but also this lack of technical support. You can't get your lectures remotely.
And of course, as you can imagine, student accommodation Wi-Fi is not built for everyone to be using it at the same time. And obviously my lectures, I think in just my block alone, my block of flats alone, I think there's something like 30 of us studying politics. So everyone is logging on to do their lectures on this Wi-Fi, and of course the Wi-Fi crashes.
Have you noticed any improvement from September?
In terms of technology, I'm in private halls, so I don't know what university-owned accommodation is doing, but my halls, I know that they've been installing better Wi-Fi systems. That we've actually had numerous emails about them. Oh, guys, we're going to be coming into your flats today to install a new Wi-Fi router. So my accommodation's been good, but as I said, it's not owned by the uni, so I genuinely wouldn't be able to tell you what the uni's done.
The knock-on effect is, of course, going to be student well-being.
Of course, yeah.
Is it easy to find and ask for help?
No.
Okay.
To be blunt, no, it's not. They send you the sort of emails that tick the boxes of this is an email address for someone that you should contact. But I think that mental health support should be very personal. And if you get an email that's sent to everyone else as well of here's this one email address that you can contact, it doesn't feel personal. It feels like they're just ticking boxes. And you know, there are mental health offices at unis, but you can't go to them.
You can't get there.
No.
Yeah. So those resources are lacking for sure.
Yes, definitely.
You live with some students. You said there's a few of you living in a flat together.
Yeah.
What's your social life like?
There's a big thing. Liverpool is one of those universities that is known for its nightlife. I think we're actually voted best nightlife uni in the country. It's very party oriented. There's a place called Concert Square in the city centre, which is basically a massive beer garden surrounded by a load of different bars, and you know, it's amazing for social life. Obviously that has been for the 20 weeks that I've been at uni. It's been open for 2
Really?
of them. I'm lucky with my accommodation because it's a very communal space. It's sort of it's more like houses, so they're in a U shape and there's a courtyard in the middle, so we can, you know, go outside and see people. But I just feel so awful for these other students that are in tower block accommodations that don't have outside areas to meet up, because obviously any communal areas that they have, they've closed them off. So, you know, the room with the pool table.
I really hope that 2021 brings brighter days for you guys and life as a student in Liverpool and everywhere else in the country and the world becomes a little bit easier for you all.
Yeah, me too.
Thanks, Amelia.
Thank you so much.
So that was head teacher Andy Percival and Liverpool University student Amelia Hepner Theodorou. I hope you enjoyed the interviews. Insightful hearing 2 different experiences, don't you think, guys?
Absolutely. Really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Loved that. That was great to have both sides of the coin.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we're all going to be talking about our own experiences and what we thought about those interviews. But Natalie, you have been asking some questions on social media and you've got some responses for us, haven't you?
I have indeed, yeah. So a few people have got in touch with us. So Megan Louise has said, the fact we're paying £9,250 when Open Uni is £3,000 and much better supported for online. Our uni, this is an interesting fact, our uni is sacking 47 members of faculty because of funding, yet they're still receiving all the money from us students. Firing people in a pandemic is so wrong. She goes on to say, she's said quite a lot actually. I think she's has quite some strong feelings about it. It's all just so bad, and trying to complete your degree in these times with no financial aid and no safety net for grades is so hard. Which raised a really, really fair point. I think that was mentioned in the interview with Amelia about the amount of money that they're paying Grace also says online learning isn't engaging, so it's hard to learn from endless Zoom calls. I completely can appreciate that. I mean, I have no sort of relationship with education at the moment. I'm not a student. I don't have children that are students or whatever. So I can only really...
Well, one of the things Andy says, doesn't he, is that the whole thing with schooling is great, but children really respond to feedback from their classmates and from their teachers. And this is the big issue, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. Interestingly enough, we've had someone from France. Claire says, I live in France and we have had limited disruption despite lockdowns. So I'd be interested to hear how they've gone about it over in France. But yes, we're talking about the UK today, and students are going back to school tomorrow. Hayley, I know you have 2 kids of your own. How are you feeling about that?
I do, yes. I'm feeling great, actually. I'm sure there's a collective sigh of relief across the country, and there'll be lots of cheering at 9:00 tomorrow morning. Yes, I do feel happy that they're going to school, and not just because it's difficult when you're trying to teach your children at home, but also for the children. I think it's really important. Andy touches on it on his interview, where he says that going to school isn't just about learning facts and figures. It's all the social element that comes with it as well. The walking to school, the walking home from school, the playing in the playground at break time and at lunchtime, and also the relationship that you have with your teachers as well is so important, and something that we remember all through our adult lives. And both of my children are desperate to get back to school. 100%. Can't wait.
Hayley, can I ask, you feel a sense of guilt? And I'm going on a conversation I had with somebody who has 2 children who are younger than yours, but nonetheless, she has been, I'm going to say forced to homeschool. But do you feel a sense of guilt around being happy that your children are going back to school? This friend of mine said, I feel awful, like it's a blessed relief. Why did I have children if I'm going to be relieved? But I'm on your side. I think for everybody's sake, I think parenting should be split between schools and the parents as well.
We live with endless parent guilt, don't we? That's what you get when you're a parent, guilt.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're right. That does come with being a parent. And yes, to answer your question, Stephen, there is an element of feeling a bit guilty. When I say, I'm looking forward to the children going back to school, part of me feels a bit sad that I'm saying that about my children, but they are going to have a much better time at school with regards to their learning and with regards to their just emotional development. They need to see their friends. They're desperate to see their friends. So there is that as well. And also, not ignoring the fact that it's bloody hard having those kids at home trying to teach them, because they don't view you as a teacher. So,
No, your authority you have no authority as a teacher. You're a parent, so it's a different relationship.
It's very frustrating. It's very frustrating for everybody. I
was very sad to hear a friend of mine had was talking about a poll that was put out to children who were ready to go back to school, and one of the most common responses from children is their anxiety with regards to returning to school was that they wouldn't have any friends anymore, or that their friends weren't going to be there. And I think that would be far more damaging to someone like me, and I think we can all relate to this, than my education. I think we can pick up our education. We can, my sister was very ill and in out of hospital as a child, but managed to pick up her education. But she did suffer with not having her friends around her all the time. So her friendship circle changed. And I think I would feel really anxious about that, especially at a vulnerable age.
Yeah, exactly. That's really sad that those children feel that way. Luckily, my children have spotted a few of their friends on the street. A lot of them live on the street, so we will doorstep them and have conversations with them. So we've been lucky in that respect that a lot of their friends live close enough that we've been able to do that. But if your friends don't, if you live in a very remote area or a long way from all of your other friends for some reason, if you have to travel to school via a car or a bus, then it's hard because you're not close to all your chums.
I was at secondary school, and we moved out of London in time for secondary, sort of mid-secondary school, and to a very rural area where my parents sort of left me get on with it. I would have hated lockdown, aside from the fact I would have been stuck in my house with my horrible stepdad, to not be able to meet friends for a walk, because I was over 5 miles away from where I went to school. So I don't know what I would have done. I think it would have been absolutely devastating. And I feel so for the same children that are stuck in tower blocks and, overcrowded. I also have equal sympathy for these children on these remote small holdings or farms or little villages that have got they haven't even got anyone locally they can meet up for a walk around with. But I have to say, and I think you're all going to think I'm really weird, homeschooling for me hasn't been so terrible, because Amelia, who we heard earlier, my child, is at university, and I've got various views on that. But Hugo is in A-level, going back, so he missed his GCSEs, Amelia missed her A-levels. Hugo is going back to do A-levels. He's missed a whole year of A-levels. He's really looking forward to it. I feel a bit sad. I kind of feel that this year, it's been a whole year now, and we've all been through something quite amazing that we will be able to tell our grandchildren. We've lived through a global pandemic, and whilst I think it's amazing that the kids are going back and they have to go back and life has to resume, I think we should hold this last year not as a negative, oh God, that was awful, but something that we'll never get this opportunity again to just slow down and stop. Well, I hope, touch wood. We were just told to sit back and chill. And the impression I got from a lot of my friends was like, we're not teachers, we'll do our best, but hey, we're just going to ride this storm, because actually mental health comes first. And if we're just all at war because our kids are screaming and no one's talking to each other, what have you, then there's no point, no one's going to learn anything. So actually, we sort of evolved and adapted for the situation. Hugo did his work, my son, did his work, but there wasn't that pressure, because I just thought, this is unprecedented. Nobody is going to be judged on this year. We are in unprecedented circumstances. And I just sort of thought, let's try and make the most of it. Let's actually try and make the most of it. So I'm kind of sad because it's the end of an era. But delighted that they are going back for all kids. It's so important with socialising and teachers doing their job, being able to do their job, because I know that's been so hard for teachers, so frustrating for teachers. But I'm very happy that they're going back, but at the same time, tinged with sadness.
That makes me think of a quote that we have in the Spence family. It's quite a great one to live by, actually. Accept, change, or leave. In any situation, you either have to accept it, change it if you have the power to, or just leave the situation.
Oh, I like
walk
that.
Away. So I think this one is kind of what you just mentioned there, Meredith, it's just an accept. You can't change it, you can't walk away, you can't fly to the other side of the world, because it's the same there. You just have to accept it and make the most of it while you can, which is easier said than done.
And you've suffered, you're an actress, and you have your other half in Australia, so you've had doubled, and living with your parents as well throughout lockdown. I mean, everybody. But it's been tough and difficult, but I did see the people that were just refusing to accept the situation were the ones really suffering, and the ones that kind of went, okay, we're going to sit on the sofa and watch Netflix and be paid for it, okay. I sort of thought, when are we ever going to get this opportunity again? And for me in PR, who goes out and meets people and has to do events, it was wonderful. I'm sorry, it was wonderful. The situation of a pandemic is not wonderful, but we made it work for us as a family.
Meredith, I have to ask you, obviously listen to Amelia's interview there, Amelia being your daughter. I commend her actually for choosing to go to university in the middle of a pandemic, and she mentioned she hasn't been onto campus once since she started, which must be a very strange sort of way of starting your university experience. Was that something that you as a mother were, and her as the student going into it, was that something you were both sort of a bit anxious about? How did that sort of work out with you?
Gosh, it was a mixture of everything. It was this to find out she'd got into the university of her choice, Liverpool, was incredible. So there was exhilaration and then the reality of, oh, okay. And back then it was just, everyone's going to die and it's going to be awful and my daughter's going to be taken into A&E without me there, and you do think the worst. But we weighed up everything, the mental health, the fact that she'd briefly mentioned, do you know what, I might take a year out. And both my husband and I had that sort of horror moment where we realised, no, we do want her to go to university, even though it's a pandemic. You know, the risks of her mental health are far more outweigh the risk of her getting COVID. Within a week of her being there, they'd all tested positive but had no symptoms. So that was a massive relief to know that they were there and they were all isolating together. It's been really sad, but again weird, and something I think she can tell her grandchildren about. She's struggled getting into Zoom meetings, which has been really upsetting. Yes, there's the fees. It's a very, very difficult one because the student, as you know, with student loans, they don't have to pay them back till they're 475 years old. This isn't the case for families that have had to self-support their children. So, for example, we're a low-income family. Amelia got a maintenance grant. We're fine. And she will have to pay that back. And she doesn't really need to worry too much about going out and getting extra work to subsidise her rent and her accommodation because they're not going anywhere at the moment. I really feel for the families that didn't meet the criteria prior to university to get the grant, be it the education, maintenance, living grant, have now been furloughed or lost their jobs or not getting anything because they're a director of a company, and yet their teenagers are at university. They can't really afford to be sending any more money. The teenagers can't go out and get a job. That, I think, is where we're really going to see problems and families struggling. And it's actually the social equality of it all has meant that there's a real unfairness for the families that didn't get the grants. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we're, for once, being poor, we're okay. And, I mean, she's budgeting and she's being careful. And like I said, she's not going out, so she's not spending. But she is okay. I know she's financially able to get food and washing powder to wash her clothes. And I know that she's okay. But yeah, I've taken far too long on this, but you get the idea. It far outweighed what was happening here, the boredom, the bickering, the stress. She would have been at home, not working, doing anything. No, she needed to be there, absolutely.
And Amelia touched on the whole fees issue that the students are having at the moment, paying £9,000 for full fees when they can't even use the university facilities. And actually, a few people have weighed in on the argument at the moment. And the president of the National Union for Students has also backed what he's saying that students deserve better than to be pushed into financial hardship. So
Liverpool were the first to say, we're not giving you refunds.
Well, what the Department for Education has said refunds were a matter for the universities. But, you know, collective voices together can put so much pressure. You know, one person on their own may not make a difference, but many people working together can change things forever. So let's hope that they keep shouting about it, and people with a bit more weight behind them maybe getting behind backing their argument, and maybe there will be refunds.
Oh, I would absolutely, just because I'm okay, mate, you know, doesn't mean that I will fight. You know, that's the problem we have. If people are happy and complacent in their own lives, they don't care about anything else. Just because we're okay doesn't mean it's not a horrendous situation for so many. And, you know, I hope once the pandemic, people can go out and be activists and riot and do what students do, then bring it on. Because, yeah, absolutely, this should be readdressed. And, of course, they should be refunded. It's ridiculous, especially if they're saving money by sacking 47 members of faculty.
Yeah, and the kids aren't even using the resources.
Exactly. Amelia has not been in her university. Like I said, the last time we were inside Liverpool University was 2 years ago, looking around it.
Wow. Stephen, I wanted to ask, the resident agony uncle, a little question, put something to you. Georgia over on Instagram has commented, as a teacher, it has been the most frustrating thing ever. I'm basically just a call centre now. Do you have, I know you work in a school, is that right?
I do. I work at a school, and I am actually also a teacher, but I teach adults, and obviously not for the last year. My sister is also a teacher at the same school, and if I've learned one thing, it is that teaching staff of any level or pay grade or any age are incredibly underappreciated, under-supported, and quite often, and infuriatingly so, blamed for what essentially is something that they love doing, but they have very little control over. But yes, I have a friend who is a secondary school English teacher who has obviously had to resort to using Zoom and has experienced some of the most shocking behaviour from parents and caregivers. And I think
really,
if I could ask...
Can you divulge on them? In what way is shocking? Just lack of help or
complete and utter... I was always... My dear friend years ago always said... never have children under the presumption that the state is responsible for them, but always presume that the state is there to help you. And I think that's a great way of putting it. And I think, there were times my mother had me, and at times she was perfectly capable of looking after me. At times we needed to rely on the state. That's what it is there for. And by the state, I mean the school. And she had said, this friend of mine, that she's not the parent, and I think there's a divide between teaching and parenting that line seems to be blurred and has become more so in lockdown. It is not the responsibility of the teaching faculty to ensure that your child is awake and on a Zoom call on what is a school day. Why, you wouldn't just let a child sleeping until 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning at 12 years old when they're supposed to be in an English class. So why is it any different? Now, obviously, every home life is different. So we really do need to be careful about and sensitive towards everybody's home life. It has differed. But what I will say, and this applies to both Amelia and Andy, is I wasn't shocked, but I was awed at how after what is now the 12th month of lockdown and quarantine, I am in awe of how dedicated they are to not just their own education, but the education of others. This is people enter into teaching and into learning because it's a passion, and that hasn't died. Yeah. And that, for me, is a wonderful thing to watch. And I hear pain in Andy's voice, and I hear frustration in Amelia's voice, but I see in them both people who will recover and who will pick themselves up and continue doing what they love doing.
His passion absolutely came across. I loved it. And you could see he's in teaching for the right reasons, and he was angry because the kids are being robbed. The kids are being slipped to Mickey. And I'm sorry, this government has been atrocious in pretty much everything. And we deserve more, and our kids deserve more. And as you know, this government was quite happy to starve children during lockdown with these appalling food hampers. So we do need to sort of all change our mindset and become a much nicer, more community. We need to look out for each other. And I do think encouraging and supporting the teachers is something that stopped happening a long time ago. I remember talking to the most wonderful teacher, a man called Mr. Lowe. He was a teacher in Camden, and then he came up to Tring to be a teacher, and he's now gone on. And I remember him saying, they were years ago, you'd have a parent and their kid in the headmaster's office, and both the parents and the teacher would be telling the kid off. Now you've got the head teacher being told off by the parents because you've let my kids down, and you've this, and there is this real thing of parents wanting teachers to do it all, but actually when it comes to it and they have to hear that little Johnny hasn't behaved particularly well, or Susie's slept through it, rather than taking it on the chin, we're attacking the teacher. And this is where let's use this year off to appreciate how bloody hard they work, how we are so lucky that Andy is still passionate and still wants to teach our children, that Amelia still wants to go to university, that, you know, our kids do still want to go to school. And let's start clapping and actually supporting our teachers a lot more. And if they are telling you your child's been an arsehole, believe them. Don't defend your child and gaslight a teacher, because this is happening all the time now, and teachers are just being broken, and we need them because education's expensive, but not as much as ignorance.
I was just going to say it would be a lovely little thing to do to give all of our favourite teachers a little shout out. I remember my favourite teacher from school was also sort of my therapist as well. He was the drama teacher. I went to see him whenever I had a problem, and he always helped me out. He was called Mr. Ed Applewhite, and he was one of my favourite teachers. Do you have any?
My favourite teacher was I had lots of good ones, but my absolute favourite was my law teacher. He was brilliant, Byron Davis. He was a judge in a magistrate's court as well as
wow.
a law teacher. And he was hilarious. He was one of those teachers that there was a line in the sand and you knew where it was. And if you crossed it, then, you know, he would just rain holy shit on you. But you could you could go up to that line and it was fine, but you didn't cross it. But no, had so much respect for him, and we went to go and see him in court, doing his judging duties a couple of times, and that was it was amazing, really good. So if you're listening, Byron,
Mr. DL was mine. He saw something in me that no one else did. He ignored bad behaviour. He rewarded good. He was a fucking legend, and I gave up on school when he left. So whoever's got Mr. DL now, I believe he's a head teacher somewhere. You're very lucky. Look after that man.
Mine was, much like yours, Natalie, mine was my drama teacher, Mrs. Mathers. I think she was my sister's form tutor. But again, she's treated us like adults, but also didn't tolerate any, not bad behaviour, but disruptive behaviour. Everybody was there to learn, and if you disrupted the education process, you know, that's when she would rain down bloody hell on you. But I always think fondly of her.
Now, I know we could talk about this for hours and hours, but we do need to round up. So, to end our conversation, funny teacher names. What funny teacher names have you got? I'm going to start off with my one. We had a maths teacher. His name was Mr. Bates. Everyone called him Master Bates.
Brilliant.
I had, and still do, he's actually now a work colleague, but my old teacher, Mr. Dobson, was affectionately known as Bad Dobby.
Bad Dobby.
Bless him. Well, Hugo's at the same school that you went to, and also producer Jeremy went to, and he is still Bad Dobby and Dobbers, as I found out when Jeremy shouted it across the Welcome New Parents assembly. I didn't really have any affectionate names for teachers because they pretty much hated me and I didn't really respond well to them. One's too rude, bit iffy, bearing in mind that a lot of teachers around here are at schools that my kids may go to. We had Mr. Roper, and I remember he was quite snazzy, a snazzy dresser, and we found out that, you know, kids are horrible. And we found out his first name was Martin, which is a completely normal and acceptable name. But whenever you find out the real name of your teachers, it's like the best thing ever. Or when you see your teachers out on a Saturday, it's like, oh. But he was Muddy Roper, but that's not really funny. And that was only really an in-joke. Like I said, I was just never really in lessons long enough to
to learn their names.
Very well at school. I've got a very rude one, but I won't repeat it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't really think of any that I had, but I did just have a little Google of it, and there's some quite funny ones that I would like to
go on.
I mean, they're not even that funny, but there's a misfigured. That's not that funny, is it?
Are these legit teachers?
I don't know. Probably not.
I love this.
Mismatch.
No.
I mean, they're not that
great. Oh no, I'm sorry, I tell a lie. We had.
Come on, Google, let me.
She
down.
wasn't my teacher. I do apologise, but when I was younger, we had a misfortune.
Misfortune.
And you can't get around that. She wasn't married. But, so we just had to call her Miss Fortune.
Love that.
When I was in university, one of my lecturers was called Mr. Head, and then we had a student lecturer come, and her name was Miss Eyeball, and Mr. Head and Miss Eyeball got married, and they joined their names together. Mr. and Mrs. Eyeball Head.
Stop it. That's not real.
That is a true, legit story.
Well, my first teacher at my secondary school was a teacher called Mrs. Chittleborough. She was only there for a year. She looked like a Barbie doll. She was so glamorous, and she taught home ec. And the boys it was like the Sandy in Grease thing when she comes out, sassier than ever. It was like the boys would be all sort of hanging around chatting, and Mrs. Chittleborough would walk down the corridors, and everyone would just stop, and it'd be almost slow motion. Her hair would be she was so gorgeous, and she was not to be messed with either, because I had a PE teacher that really picked on me. Today it would almost be deemed as abusive, and I told her, and she waded in on him, and it was amazing to watch. And I remember thinking then, yeah, you can look absolutely gorgeous and be a strong, powerful woman that takes no shit. And she literally broke this big burly, as we all know PE teachers are, I know your sister's a PE teacher, isn't she, Stephen? But they hated me. I think if you're good at sport, they're great. But I do think people have suffered the most abuse over the years from PE teachers. You have, haven't you? Come on, back me up on this.
I was rubbish at PE. Yeah. I wasn't a big fan of theirs, and they weren't a big fan of mine.
No.
I was the kid with the asthma pump in a cardigan pocket,
I was the one with the letter from my mum. Producer Jeremy and I had the same PE teacher when we realised.
What did your letter say?
My letter.
He's got his period.
I had a weekly ailment, which we ought not commit to. I wasn't sporty. I'm still not sporty now. My sister and I, from the same womb, I think not. I would write. I tried this on a couple of occasions. I always signed the letter from Judy, not from Mrs. anything. It was always from Judy, written with my awful dyslexic handwriting. And I always remember one of them was, "Dear Mr. So and So, Stephen has done something," and then wrote, "So obviously he can't take part in PE today." Such a passive-aggressive letter. I hated it so much. But I was picked on brutally by my PE teachers because I wasn't sporty.
But they are the worst. I mean, I'm sorry to all PE teachers listening, and your sister again. And I have to say, she's like an Iron Woman as well. She's incredible, your sister. She's brilliant, but I have to say the biggest brutality I have found at school was at the hands of 80s PE teachers.
We've had a message in saying my son had a teacher called Mr. Fiddler, and I couldn't keep a straight face when I found out his first name was William. Willie Fiddler! Willie Fiddler!
No. I know one of them, but that's not his name.
You had to go there.
Yeah.
I think that's all we've got time for. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, guys. Absolutely brilliant week.
It's been a really good conversation, and good luck to you all if your kids are going back to school, and if you're in education, I guess.
I think we should revisit it in a month. Is it better after they've gone back?
Yeah, we can definitely revisit it for sure.
I think Hayley's the marker for this one. Take care, guys.
See you next week.
See you next week.
If you or anyone you know has been affected by any of the subject matter we have covered in this week's podcast, please see the show notes for details of places you can find help, support or advice.
Thank you very much for listening to 4 Calling Birds. Don't forget that you can follow us on Instagram at 4callingbirds_podcast. That's the number 4, callingbirds_podcast. You can tweet us at birds_calling or find us on Facebook.